It looked like somebody was bent over and had their head in the window of the deer blind. It either heard me or smelt me, and he pulled his head out of the tent and stood straight up, and that shocked me. They don't make people that big.
The way it moved, almost as if it was gliding across the beach. I've never seen anything move like that in my life. They were screaming at each other in gibberish. It sounded like a language, and they were chuntering away back and forwards, back and forwards, back and forwards. I know what a bear looks like, and there is no way on this planet that what I saw were bears.
What are you reporting?
Jesus Christ, you better...
Sir?
Gia!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
I once reported Bobo from the Bigfoot and Beyond podcast to the Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Turns out he's clean, but I'm glad I did it.
Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Got a great show planned for you. We're going to be chatting with Johnathan, and Johnathan comes to us from Utah. Back in August, him and his family were actually out camping, and a lot of weird things happened around the camp. Johnathan got a small look at the creature. He thought it was a guy in a ghillie suit until he saw all the muscles, and he ended up going and looking for it the next day. It's a pretty cool account. If you've had an encounter and you'd like to be on the show, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. And if you get a chance, check out sasquatchchronicles.com. You can become a member and get additional shows. Next week, there won't be any shows. I'll actually be on vacation. Kind of think it's like the first vacation I'm taking in like 10 years. So looking forward to it. So just giving you a heads up, next week, there won't be any shows. Last episode, I did 20 of the strangest facts you probably didn't know. And it seems like a lot of people enjoyed it. So let's do it again. Let's have a little fun before we bring Johnathan on.
Here are the 20 facts you probably did not know. Number 20. President John Quincy Adams had a pet alligator. Adams kept it in one of the White House bathtubs and enjoyed showing it off.
It's weird. An alligator for a pet.
Number 19. Blood donors in Sweden receive a text when their blood is used. Number 18. You are more likely to get a computer virus from visiting religious sites than porn sites.
That's kind of a weird fact. Where's my fact checker at?
According to research from the security firm Symantec, religious websites can carry 3 times more malware threats than pornography sites.
I guess there you go. Story checks out.
Number 17. Admiral Akbar from Return of the Jedi was not a man in a suit. It was actually a giant puppet. Number 16. The Boston Marathon did not allow female runners until 1972. Number 15. The state of Nebraska's official state slogan is, Nebraska, honestly, it's not for everyone.
What a terrible slogan. I've been to Nebraska. It's not that bad.
Nebraska is terrible.
Nobody asked for a fact check.
Number 14. In 1980, the Las Vegas hospital suspended workers for betting on when patients would die.
That's pretty disgusting. There's not even a joke there.
Number 13. Cats are not able to taste anything that is sweet. Number 12. Your fingernails grow faster when you are cold.
I'm going to go ahead and call BS on this one. Despite being a dumb hillbilly, I actually do read, and I think it has to do with circulation. Fact checker?
Nails grow when there is a good blood circulation. In the cold, your fingernails don't grow. It is a misconception that nails grow faster when it is cold.
I thought so. Got to keep these 20 facts honest. Where's that accent from, fact checker? I want to say Australia, but it kind of has a little British. Anyway.
Number 11. A typical cough travels at a speed of 60 miles per hour, while a sneeze is often faster than 100 miles per hour. Number 10. Pound cake is so called because the recipes once called for a pound of butter, a pound of sugar, a pound of eggs, and a pound of flour.
No wonder why pound cake tastes so amazing.
Number 9. Apples float because they are 1/4 air. Number 8. Venus spins clockwise. It's the only planet that does. Number 7. One day on Venus is almost 8 months on Earth. Number 6. You are taller in the morning when you first get up than when you go to bed.
I think this one's actually true. I can't remember why. Fact checker?
We are taller in the morning because during the normal activities during the day, the cartilage in our knees and other areas slowly compress.
Number 5. Your eyes blink around 20 times a minute. That's over 10 million times a year. Number 4. The Spanish national anthem has no words.
That's really strange, not having any words in your national anthem.
You have a large Spanish audience.
I mean, it makes total sense.
Number 3. It takes 8 minutes and 19 seconds for light to travel from the sun to Earth. Number 2. The term footage comes from films being measured in feet when being edited in the early days of filmmaking. And finally, number 1. He was born into poverty. His mother died when he was 9. His family was forced out of their home. He had to work to support them. His first love died. He twice failed in business and suffered a total nervous breakdown and was in bed for 6 months. He was a skilled wrestler and somewhat of a trash talker. The rugged frontiersman once beat a man with a single toss and challenged the mob that had gathered. He lost several elections. He became one of the greatest presidents in the United States of America. Abraham Lincoln. Never give up, and that is 20 facts that you probably did not know.
Yeah, definitely never give up. Abraham Lincoln, what a life. I think that was actually 19 facts, not 20.
Yes, 19 facts, not 20.
Thanks, fact checker. I hope everyone enjoyed the 19 facts you probably didn't know instead of 20. Let's jump into it tonight. I want to welcome Johnathan to the show. Johnathan, thanks for coming on.
You're welcome. It's good to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you on here, Johnathan. And I know your encounter took place last August in Utah. If you would you just start from the very beginning? Kind of tell us what you were doing and walk us into what happened.
All right. So my kids, my whole family have been begging me to go on a camping trip and take them fishing. And so we had planned to go on a camping trip in August due to that being the most convenient time for us. I had my last week of school for an apprenticeship program that I had been completing. We were going to go up on Friday night once I was done with school, but I had to go down to the Union Hall to complete everything there. Otherwise, we would have been there for 5 nights instead of 4 nights. So in planning the trip, we knew that we weren't going to be able to reserve a camping space up near Lake Highway because the coronavirus had put everybody up into the mountains. And so I knew a place called Upper Setting Road, which is just outside of Camas. I don't know, maybe 15 or 20 minute drive up Mirror Lake Highway. And I knew there would be a lot of primitive camping spots up there, so we planned accordingly, and we drove up there. We had to go really far in, almost as far in as the road went. It only goes in about 7 miles or so. We were about 6-ish miles once we finally found a spot to go camping. And we pulled off, and it looked like it would be a suitable spot. So we pulled off the side of the road, and my wife and I got out of the vehicle. And as soon as we got out, we heard this knocking sound. It was probably 4 or 5, and it was kind of strange because it was kind of a hollow knocking sound. It was like, 3 or 4 seconds, maybe 2 seconds apart each. So it was like a bonk, bonk, bonk. It was just 4 or 5 times in a row, and I immediately thought that was kind of odd. But the wind was blowing, and so I had chalked it up to maybe the wind at that point. So we got out and we found a nice place where we could set up our tent, and so we had decided to stay. And took us a while to set up everything. We kept periodically hearing that same sound. And I'd even done a little walkabout around just to explore, because I thought I heard a small stream down, which ended up being a really tiny creek. You could pretty much step across it. But it was enough because, water around a camping trip is always fun. So in my walkabout, I call it a little loop-de-loop, just walk around about 100 yards or so around and see what's there, and made it back to camp. And we finished everything up, and like I said, we'd periodically been hearing these knocking sounds and didn't really do anything else except play around the campsite that day. And we started getting dinner ready. We kept hearing that knocking sound at night. And this was Saturday, and then we heard some people drive past us, and they sounded like they wanted to camp because they slowed down. And they're like, "Hey, those people were still setting up, and there must be still something up." And so they went down farther the way. And when we started to put everyone down for bed, which was after dark or right at dark, so it was kind of late, it was around 9:30ish, maybe 10. And we kept hearing that bonking sound. And the people down the way, I call them yuppies just because they were playing the guitar and singing, but those guys kept going and going. We thought they would never stop. And that bonking sound had moved down toward that area. So it was basically parallel the road from where we were at all the way down toward where they were at. And, maybe quarter of a mile or 600 yards or so down the way, but that bonking sound kept happening every, maybe 10 or 15 minutes while they were singing. And they kept singing until about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. It was pretty late. And so they finally stopped singing. My wife and I finally able to get to sleep because the bonking had stopped, and we're so tired at the point we drifted off. And I was always the first one up in the morning. And so I'd wake up and I'd get the fire stoked, and it was Sunday morning, and I heard the bonking sound off kind of in the original position that it was when we had first driven up with a vehicle to come out and check out the camping spot.
And Jonathan, I don't mean to cut you off, but when you say bonking sound, is it like a wood knock? Is that what you're describing?
Yeah, well, it's not like somebody was smacking a tree or anything. It sounded like somebody was holding a large, hollowed out wooden, I'd have to say like a musical instrument or something that you'd hear in a band, but it was, I don't know, it's hard to describe. So it sounded like somebody was holding a hollowed piece of wood in their hand and smacking it with a piece of wood.
Oh, I gotcha. I didn't mean to cut you off. I apologize.
No, that's fine. It was really kind of odd to hear out in the woods because you usually just hear trees cracking into each other or anything. So it obviously stood out. My wife had asked me if that was normal. I'm like, no, she knew too. And we had decided that we needed to go grab some stuff in town. So we all packed in the car and left after we'd eaten breakfast. And we spent the day up the canyon, up Mirror Lake Highway, going back and forth, checking out various spots to go fishing. We pulled some brook trout out of the Provo River, and we had come back to camp around 5 or 6 o'clock at night. And I stepped out, and I always have a pistol with me, and I had purchased a 22 single action pistol, and that happened to be with me at the time when I stepped out of the car. And right as I stepped out of our vehicle, I heard that 3 knocking sounds again. It was just a consecutive bonk, 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 and I'm just like, okay. So I pulled out my pistol and I fired 3 times the same length of time in between. So I'm just like, pop, 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 and I yelled, "There's my tree knocking, you tree knocking." I can't remember what I said. I wasn't cursing or anything. And then immediately after I had finished shooting and yelling, there was another bonking sound. And I was half tempted to shoot off again, but I decided not to. And we had, just decided to clean up our catch and cook it up. So we got the fire going again. And, it was just a typical thing at night. Kept going, kept hearing that popping sound or the knocking sound. And my wife's like, well, what do you think is making something like that? It's like, I'm not sure. I've heard that some people say that Sasquatch will like smack trees or something. And I'm kind of suspicious at this point. And so in our effort to keep a fire going, we had actually started gathering a lot of extra wood. And I made a little game for the kids to pull as much wood as they could because I wanted to keep the fire going because I was starting to feel a little bit uneasy because that sound, we were hearing it during the day and night. Nothing that I know of will make a noise day and night. And so I started to keep the fire going, and I'd get up in the middle of the night after we went to bed and I'd walk over there and I'd stoke the fire, keep it going because I just kind of feeling uneasy about the whole situation. And Monday morning comes, we hear the bonking sounds again, and we leave to go do our thing, come back, more of the same, some more bonking noises, and we stayed up a little bit late that night, and so everyone was tired, and we put everyone down to sleep. And the next day, on Tuesday, I woke up with the sun again, and I wanted to make a nice breakfast for everybody. It took a lot of prep work. For the Dutch oven, it took me a few hours to get it done and going to where I was satisfied enough. And it was around 9 o'clock in the morning, and I remember because I had checked my phone because my family was still sleeping. And like, gosh, they're really sleeping in. And I wanted to make them sleep or let them sleep so that we go out and do some more fun stuff. And at that time, right around 9, I don't even remember what I needed from my car, but I needed to get something from my vehicle. And the vehicle was parked about, I'd say, maybe 50 feet from where the campfire was, and it's up this small hill. So I started walking up to go get it, whatever it was I needed from the car at the time. And as I got to the point where the hood of my car, I was kind of watching the path, and across the road, I noticed some movement. And the movement, it looked like something had very quickly and smoothly it stopped really fast, but it kind of bent down at the same time that it had stopped. And there was an old a logging trail. It's not really a logging trail. It's probably a four-wheeler trail, but it had been, the access point had been dug out by a tractor so that you couldn't get your four-wheelers up there anymore. And the sun was behind me so that I could see clearly what it was that I was looking at. And I was pretty confused because some of it was covered up by the foliage that was there, but there was a big open spot. And by big and open, it was about 3x3. And I know that because a couple of weeks later, I came back with my brother because we were scouting the area. So we had a hunt coming up in a month or two. And I had him squatting in the area so that I knew how large it was and I could compare what I had saw with his size. And what I saw was, it reminded me of a guy in a ghillie suit. And not the ones that you see on the TV that are kind of scraggly, like the first ones that you see like back in World War II, probably, just the really old ones where they're kind of the thick cloth. The entire thing was gray. And I don't know why I thought of a dude in a ghillie suit. It's probably because of the tufts of hair that were all over the place. It was kind of like Bob Marley's Roots, but they were only like 4 to 6 inches long. And I think I only saw this thing for about maybe 5 seconds tops, but I think it had to have realized that I was looking at it and that I saw it because I stopped and I stared because I'm trying to figure out what this is. Whatever it was covering the entire 3x3 area and then some. And it was in a completely relaxed state because when it decided to move, the entire side of what I saw had flexed. And I'd have to say it was its haunches because if it was bent over like I thought I was seeing, then it had to have been the side of its backside, and I could see the the thing was ripped. When it flexed, you could see the ripples of its muscles. And that whole area was huge. It's probably, the size of a really large, kind of a beach ball, if I'm going to describe the size of that compared to my brother's head, because my brother's head was kind of there later. And what really threw me off was how the thing moved off into the foliage. It was so fluid and smooth. There's no other way that I can describe the way that it moved. It almost kind of floated, but it was kind of fluid and smooth. And it was kind of one fluid motion when it decided to start moving. It wasn't jerky. I didn't see any little feet from a deer or an elk or anything else that I'd ever seen. And I've seen pretty much everything up here. I've seen bear, moose, elk, deer, coyotes. And one thing that I had failed to mention is that every night that we were there, right as dusk came, everything was dead silent. There was no noise anywhere, no coyotes yipping or howling. And I've never been up in this spot or in this area without hearing one or two groups of coyotes going at it right at dusk. And I know they were there because of what happened later. So I tried to see what it was after it moved off, because it moved off completely silent. The wind was blowing from my back to my front. So I didn't smell anything like people on your show say they smelled something. I don't know if it did stink or not, because the wind was wrong anyway. And I took off my flip-flops in the middle of the road, and I had some socks on because it was a chilly morning. It was pretty cold up there, maybe 40 degrees in August. And I started walking in my socks together because I wanted to see what it was. And I walked up to the spot where I saw it, and I looked for tracks, but I didn't see anything. And up in the high mountains in Utah, if you've ever been there, you generally just see a whole bunch of rocks. Maybe you'll get some grass and stuff growing in between the rocks on top of the rocks. But this was just a bunch of rocks and pine needles, and I didn't see anything. But I did hear something step on a branch or a piece of wood or fallen branch or whatever, but it cracked. But it was so far off, there's no way a normal animal that you would generally see in this area would move that far that fast without making a noise. Because deer, if you don't spook them, they'll move off a short distance, they'll stop, they'll turn and stare at you. Elk will kind of do the same thing until you make them uncomfortable, and then they'll just take off. And if you spook an elk, they'll crash right through the forest, and you can hear them until they're gone. And I know it wasn't a bear because I've seen bear there, and bears don't move the way this thing moved when I saw it. Bears kind of have a waddle to them when they start moving. And I remember, because I was still confused at this point, so I didn't know if it was an animal. I didn't know if it was a guy. I was pretty sure it wasn't a guy because people don't move that way. And in that same spot, I didn't go any further because I didn't want to worry my family if my wife had woken up and she came out to camp and I wasn't there. But all of a sudden, there was nice breakfast that was already cooking, but I was nowhere to be seen. I didn't want to freak him out. So instead of pursuing to try to see what it was, I audibly said out loud, "I saw you," because I didn't know if it was a guy or not. But there's no way it was a guy because the thing was so big. Thinking back, comparing it to my brother that was squatting in the same area, I'd have to say the thing was 3 or 4 times his size. And he is a little bit taller than me, and he weighs over 200 pounds. I'm 6 foot. So he's maybe 6.5 feet or 6'1", but this thing dwarfed him in mass when it moved. So the thing was huge. And when my wife woke up, I told her that I had seen something. And she asked what I saw, and I told her the same thing that I told you. I said it reminded me of a dude in a ghillie suit, but it had matted hair, kind of in clumps that was stranded like roots. It was just clumps of hair all over the place, and the thing was solid gray. The skin was gray. When the muscles rippled, all of that was gray, and the hair was gray. And I told her that we weren't going to do anything that day because I wanted to go out and see what this was. And so after we had cleaned up breakfast, maybe it was 11 o'clock, and I told her I'd be back at maybe 12 or 12:30 at the latest. And I gave her a radio, a two-way radio, and I took the other radio with me. And I went off after this thing to see what I could find. So I walk out there and I take the old logging road, four-wheeler trail, whatever you want to call it, and I started walking around, following that in, and I started following it up all the way, or I came across this huge field that had a pond with lily pads in the middle of it. And I followed the logging trail up to the right all the way around this rim, and the rim was started to climb, so I was about 50 or 60 feet above it, and I came down, went behind this field, walked down to the creek. There's a little creek where it had drained out of the lily field, or the lily pad pond. It was in the middle of this field and out, and I didn't see any deer, didn't really hear anything other than squirrels. Kind of looped back around into this sparse area that had a whole lot of trees that were maybe 10, 15 feet apart. They weren't really thick. There's pretty tall. There's a lot of short foliage around, maybe knee height. Nothing you can't easily walk through. And then I got this pants scared off me because I jumped a roughneck grouse. The strange thing about that is when you usually walk up on a roughneck grouse, they kind of start cooing at you to let them know that you're there. They're getting nervous, and then they'll jump if you keep going after them. They'll jump up and fly away. But that sucker just scared me, and I didn't see anything all the way back to camp. And that wasn't good enough for me. So I told my wife that I was going to go out again after dinner. So we kind of just hung around camp that day. We didn't do anything. And we cooked a dinner. And then I went out from about 5, it was probably later than that, probably like 6 or 7 o'clock until dusk. I had surmised to go down to this big field because I wanted to look for deer at the same time, because I had a hunt coming up. I want to know if it was a good area, but we hadn't seen hardly any deer there, which was really odd to begin with, because this is a pretty wild area. Every time I've come out in this area, the first bear I saw was less than a mile from where I was currently camping. And I was probably 15 to 20 feet away from it before I stepped off the trail to kick and break branches to get it to take off. I didn't have a pistol with me at the time, but so I knew, and I didn't see any moose, no elk, didn't even hear anything. There was pretty much nothing there. But when I had gone, I followed the logging road again, and because it kind of split a short ways in and it went down toward this field. So I followed that, and I had jumped a couple of doe that got up. I'm like, okay, there is some deer here, so that's not terrible. Maybe I'll see something else. And they kind of blew at me the way that deer do when you startle them, or they want to let you know that they're there, let other deer know. You know what I'm talking about, right? They just go, yeah. And so I turned left and broke down toward this field, and I found a place that was really good that would conceal me pretty much 100% from anything unless it walked up behind me. There was an old stump on my right, and there was a short fir tree that had a base of about maybe 8 inches wide. And so I stood up behind this tree stump, and I sat there, and I waited, and I waited, and I waited. And after maybe an hour in there not seeing anything, I saw a fawn on the other side of this field, which is probably about 100 yards in width and maybe 200 or 300 yards wide. And then it was kind of an L shape. So on my left, I was concealed by some fir trees as well, but it was also open down to my left. And now toward my left was that area I had told you about that was kind of more open with the trees that were kind of sparse and sporadic, so you could see stuff. And while I was sitting there during that first hour, I started to hear that bonking sound off to my left. And at this point, I'm like, because I really don't believe in coincidences. I'm like, there's got to be something here, because I'm not going to hear that same sound over a half mile away from camp to where I'm at camp, and then I'm hearing it at night too. There's no way that's going to happen. So something was deliberately making that noise for some reason, and I don't know why. I'm guessing maybe it was communicating with something else, but it was always sporadic It wasn't always the same. Sometimes it was only one bonking sound. Sometimes it was 2 or 3. We never heard more than 3 since the first time we got out of the car when we were looking to camp there. And during that time, even while I'm hearing the knocking sound, because the wind was blowing from my left to my right, but kind of in my face. So I was set up pretty good to see any prey that's running through there, deer, elk, whatever might be there. And about an hour into it, I saw a fawn just start sprinting from my right to my left, but across the field. It was in the tree line. It never broke cover. And then about 5 to 10 minutes later, I saw the mother, but she came out into the field and kind of followed the tree line down to the left to where that brook was that fed out of the lily pads. And then maybe 30 minutes or so later, I saw a coyote came out from the other side, crossed diagonal from my right down to my left. It didn't go into the field or into the sparse wooded area that I told you about, where I jumped that ruffed grouse. It actually went past it, kind of back toward my camp. And so I know for a fact that coyotes were in the area, but I was still not hearing them anywhere. And the sun had just gone past the tree line, and I started to kind of get a little bit uneasy, and I'm like, maybe I should go. No, I'm going to stay until dark. I'm going to stay until dark is what I told my wife. And I started to get kind of uneasy. I'm just like, you know what? I'm just going to go back. And I started to head back. And as soon as I got on the road, I started feeling really uneasy. Like, when there's something there and there's something's watching me, and it was quiet. And there should have been some squirrel chatter because it was still kind of light, but it kind of followed the same patterns back at camp. It got dusk and everything just got quiet. And so I actually pulled out my 45 and I locked and loaded that sucker. And I had it ready because I was feeling really creeped out, which usually doesn't happen for me. I'm a pretty level-headed guy. And then I ended up walking back to camp without incident. And we finished wrapping up. I think we did maybe some marshmallows or something that night. I don't remember. And then we ended up going to bed, and we hadn't really heard that knocking sound or the bonking sound at all. And I'm like, hey, by this time we're in the tent and we're getting ready to go to bed, and we're already zipped up and literally heads on pillows. I'm like, hey, we haven't heard that sound tonight. And like, that's kind of good. And then I was in denial right when this happened, but right above our tent to the left, that logging road actually takes an incline. So the road goes in, and then the side of the road where we were camped next to, it follows it up. So they kind of cut out the road. And so it goes up about 40 or 50 feet high. And if I was standing up there, I could see directly down at my campsite without a problem. And I heard that knocking sound again. It happened once. It was bonk. Right as I said, we hadn't heard that tonight. So, and my wife's like, well, there it is. And I'm like, no, that wasn't it. She's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was. I'm like, no. I'm just trying to no, the thing's gone. Whatever it is making that noise is gone. But it was still there. And so we slept the night away. And I woke up in the middle of the night thinking that I was hearing it consistently, but it ended up, I think I was just freaking myself out. Because my wife, her jaw will pop sometimes in her sleep, and she'll do it quite a bit. It'll just pop. And so I woke up thinking I was hearing that bonking sound, but it was really my wife's jaw. But she told me the next morning that she woke up in the middle of the night because she heard somebody talking. I'm like, what? She's like, and she said that she was kind of dreaming it. She wasn't sure if she was dreaming it or not, but it was somebody it was a female, right? Yeah, she said it was a female saying, they're still here. And then she woke up and sat up so that she could listen with both ears. And she said that she heard something moving away from our camp. So I don't know what was going on with that.
So did you guys end up leaving the next day?
The next day we were scheduled to leave, and we were the only ones on the mountain at this point because everybody else had left on Sunday night. And then, periodically see someone come up in a truck because it was nearing hunting season. The bow opener was the following week, so you'd occasionally get guys going up and doing that. But there's no way, if you know bow hunters, there's no way a bow hunter's just going to screw with the family for a week. So I automatically discounted that. They're too busy trying to find a good spot to get their quarry.
Yeah, and I think most people are not going to sit and screw with the family. It's just common knowledge. You don't screw with people out there, especially in the woods, because most people are armed to the teeth. And
Everybody's got guns.
Yeah, you start playing games, man. You can get shot really quick. I want to ask you about the bonking sound. I had Dave, Scott, and Jeff on the last show, and they were talking about, I can't remember who brought it up. I want to say it was Dave that brought it up, but he was talking about this weird sound that they hear around their property. And I asked him to describe it, and he said it's kind of like a wine bottle, a real weird popping sound that you hear when they're around. Would you describe it like that, or you had mentioned kind of like a hollow hitting something hollow?
Yeah, like I was telling you last night, if I was to actually describe it from a picture in my head from the sound, I'm pretty musically inclined. I used to sing a lot, but this totally reminded me of somebody holding like a huge hollowed out wooden bell that somebody was hitting with a piece of wood. I'd probably describe it to make that sound. I mean, it would have to be big, probably 10 to 12 inches wide, maybe with the wooden ring, maybe like an inch thick, and maybe, at least 12 inches deep. I mean, the sucker, it was loud. It was very loud. I mean, there's no mistaking it when you heard it. It wasn't an accident. And after we had packed up and gone home, once because we're out of cell range, you're dead out here. There's nothing. If something happens, you're SOL if you're not prepared. And so as soon as we were in cell phone range, I'm like, okay. I'm like, Laura, I need you to look up what makes freaking wood knocking sounds. Because I didn't really know a whole lot about Sasquatch at this point. I'd seen your typical Bigfoot films that they had from the 70s. And I can't remember what it's called. You mention it all the time on your show. But the only thing that came up was chipmunks or squirrels. And there's no way a chipmunk is making that kind of noise.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things, or two of the things that really stand out to me about your encounter, Johnathan, I can't tell you how many hunters. Well, I'll give you one example. I've talked about it on the show before. There was a hunter here in Washington State, and he had come across what he thought was another hunter. Usually hunters will go, hey, I came across this weird bear. This guy was different. He said, I was kind of up on this ridge, and I saw what appeared to be another hunter in like an older ghillie suit or something. It was the weirdest ghillie suit I've ever seen. And he was just walking along while the hunter yelled down to him. Because, a lot of time hunters will kind of give each other a wave or whatever, just so you don't end up shooting each other. And he said this thing stopped, looked up at him, and then just kept walking. And it wasn't until he got down on that road he realized how big this thing actually was. And he was like, it was weird. It didn't have an orange vest. He wasn't carrying a gun. And he was just he looked out of place. But listening to your encounter reminded me of my own, when me and my brother saw the thing go across the road. I think it was a few months later we went back, and it was during the day, and I had him get in the spot to where the thing stepped down the road. And I remember it hit me at that moment thinking, my brother looks like a little person or a midget out there compared to what I saw. I mean, the thing was huge. And, having was it your brother that went back and kind of got in between the trees?
Yeah, because I blabbed my mouth about this thing to everybody I saw. The first thing when I walked in the triple wide, it's just where all of the superintendents hang out on the job site. When I walked in, I was like, Bigfoot's real, y'all. Bigfoot freaking lives. It's real. And then I went about my work day, but then I told everybody there, and Jeremy, he's my brother, and I told him everything. And when we were out scouting, because we'd go after work, it was about an hour and 20-minute drive from our job site to where we're going to go hunting. And so we'd leave on an 8-hour day. We usually work 10s. We'd leave on an 8-hour day to get up there. We'd go scouting around for 2-3 hours. And I had to take him exactly where it was that we were camping because he wanted to see it. By that, I mean see where everything took place.
Yeah.
And we even had something weird kind of happen to us when we were up there, because we kind of went to the same logging road. We hiked up above, and there's a little lake up there. And we sat there and waited to see if anything showed up. And there were dragonflies and everything there. And we kept hearing something off to our left pushing boulders around. And I can chalk that up to a bear or whatever, but it sounded like something was pushing, maybe twice the size of a softball. You know what I'm talking about, that kind of a sound when those boulders or those rocks
kind of
get pushed around.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it happened every 5 minutes or so while we were there. And my brother's like, that's kind of weird. It's like, do you want to go check it out? I'm like, no, I don't. I didn't want to go. We were kind of away. It was getting dark. And I had my 45 with me, but I didn't want to spend the time to go all the way over there. I kind of wish I would have. I mean, I walked over there on the hunt to see what was over there and never really saw anything. Got creeped out a little bit, but it could have been just me.
Yeah, I'm really curious though. Did you have that moment when your brother got in that spot and you thought, "Wow, he looks tiny"?
Yeah, that's when I figured out that spot was bigger than I thought it was. And then I started realizing whatever was there was definitely not, it was 100% not anything that I'd ever seen before, because when you replay it in your head and you go back to that moment every time, you're standing in that spot staring right there. And I didn't see any legs from a deer move, like I told you before. No elk, it wasn't normal. And when the thing moved away, it was so fluid in its movement. It almost kind of floated, but it was so quiet. I don't know how else to describe. I don't know if there's any words that are better to describe the way that it moved. It was very fluid and smooth in its movement, and then it was gone.
Yeah, and they definitely are very fluid when they move. I mean, it's almost looks kind of fake when you first see it. Fake, what I mean by that is like when you watch a movie and there's CGI and you're like, oh, come on. It's kind of like that, but it's in real life. You're looking at something, you're like, it shouldn't move like that. There's nothing on this planet that moves the way these things move.
Yeah. So, yeah, back at the job site, because I started blabbing it to everybody, and then somebody that I talked to that hunts mentioned it to me. Hey, I heard you saw Sasquatch. And I'm like, yeah, you here to make fun of me? They're like, what are people saying? They're saying, I don't want to say my last name, but they used crazy because it kind of fits with my last name. And it's kind of brilliant. That's what I came up with. It's crazy, my last name. She's like, no, most people believe you. I'm like, really? But what was interesting is, there's one guy, Tyler, who gave me a really hard time. Really hard time. Like, started posting some derogatory pictures of Bigfoot and so on. Hey, did you see this? My wife's going to be jealous if this is true. Whatever. But in blabbing my mouth, I actually, I was working with a woman at the time. We were paired up together to go do some electrical work in tagging the gear that was on site. And she actually turned to me after I told her the story. She said, I've been face to face with the expletive. And I'm like, really? And so she told me her story. And she was with her boyfriend down on Utah Lake, on the southern end of Utah Lake. She said, you're not going to believe me when you find out where it was at, which is kind of, I have to believe her, because if I expect anyone to believe my story, I can't discount somebody else's experience. Otherwise, I'm pretty stupid. So she said that they had backed up her Jeep to the water's edge. Utah Lake is a pretty big lake. It's really murky. It's pretty shallow. It's really good for catfishing. You can catch 2 foot or larger catfish. For Utah, that's pretty good because you only get channel catfish up here, or mud cats. They were laying in the back waiting for the fish to bite. And earlier, she said that there had been some raccoons that were hanging around, and she kept hearing this rustling. After a while, she's like, oh, I should get up to see if those raccoons are still bugging to make sure they're not doing anything to her car. So she got out, and this was a while. I didn't remember all the details of her story because I wasn't there, but she said that she got this feeling, and she decided she turned and looked, and the thing was staring from the other side of her. It was a Jeep Cherokee that she had. So It's pretty tall. It said the thing was staring over the top at her, and she could see it clear. And I think she shouted. Her boyfriend got out and saw the same thing, and then the thing turned and ran away. And she described the thing running away was she took her hands and she smacked them down on the table pretty much as quick as she could, and said the thing had moved by sound faster than she'd ever heard. So she and her boyfriend had packed up and bailed. They went home, got their guns, and they waited till light came back. So they wanted to see what they could find. And so I don't know if you're familiar with Utah, but around Utah Lake, there's a lot of reeds that'll grow kind of like a cattail, but it's not a cattail. It's an invasive weed from Russia. But it grows kind of like a cattail without the cattail hot dog looking thing on the end of it. And they're everywhere. And they can grow like 6 to 8 feet tall. And she said that they found an area that had been matted down that had a old cat, or not an old catfish skeleton, but one that had been freshly caught, where the guts were laying there, but the skeleton had been stripped of its meat completely. And it was laying perfect there with the guts right next to it. And then the other guy that I work with, because Tyler, he's the one that was giving me a hard time. He said, well, hey, this other guy who also happens to be named Tyler swears that he saw one where he was at like years ago. So I found Tyler and I'm like, dude, I need to hear your story. I ended up telling him mine first. And he told it quick because we were under some pressure to get some gear taken care of, like gear. We're electricians, so we're working on a big job site. So that obviously takes precedence over our casual conversations. But he said that he used to do water quality testing for some company. And he would drive around to these man-made lakes or reservoirs in Utah to do water quality testing, something like that. And he said that he had a van and a trailer. I don't even know what was on the trailer because he kind of glossed over the story pretty quick. But he said they would sleep in the back of the van. So he was up at a place called State Line Reservoir, and it's on the border of Utah and Wyoming. And it's way up in the UNS. There's really nothing around. And he said that there's a locked gate that you have to have a key to get into. So he knew it wasn't anyone else because they bailed after all of this happened. He said he was in his sleeping bag, and his partner that he was with was sleeping on the other side of the van. And he was just starting to doze. He started hearing this noise or walking coming toward him, and kind of woke up because he could hear it through the van. And he said that it moved really fast in just a few steps. And then all of a sudden, the entire van jerked because the thing had jumped on the tongue of the trailer that he was pulling, forcing the front of the van up. And at this point, he's wide awake and staring out the window, freaked out. And he said that he sees a shadowy figure stick its face into the window and look inside. And I'm like, well, I asked him what he saw. He said the thing looked like it had a curious look on its face. And I'm like, what did it look like? He said the thing had dreads. I'm like, what do you mean like dreads? I'm like, because I guess you could kind of say what I saw was kind of like dreads too. He said kind of like Bob Marley, but not that long. And he said it was only there for a minute. And he said there's more to the story, but we didn't have a whole lot of time to go over everything. He's kicking it on a beach right now in Hawaii, so I really can't talk to him about it. I've been dying to hear the rest of the story. But he said after that, him and his partner were like, we need to get the blank out of here. And so they got in the front of the van, went to the gate and bailed. And they knew that nobody else was there because that was the only road to get to where they could get. And they took it all the way out, and there's no one else around. There's no way somebody else was screwing with them. Plus, with it heaving up the front end of the van, there's no what kind of person can do that just by jumping on the tongue? I mean, I've stepped on the back of my own vehicle and started jumping up and down, but it's nothing like what he described, you know?
Yeah, it's definitely terrifying. You hear about them doing that, or like parked cars. I've heard about them doing that in RVs. They'll actually hit the side of an RV or almost rock it like they're going to knock it over. Definitely a lot of power with these things, and they're in Utah. I want to ask you, going back to your encounter with the bonking noise that you heard, and then its general behavior. What do you make of that? What do you think it was doing?
I'm not sure. I've actually thought about that quite a bit because I had 4 kids with me. And I was thinking, why 5 knocking sounds the first time we got there? Why 3 the second time? And then why only 1 or 2 periodically throughout the day on every other day that we were there? I mean, I even went through, did I have the windows down in the back? I had 3 kids in the middle seat. My oldest daughter was in the back. I have dark tinted windows in the back. If the middle windows were down, they could count how many people there are. Hence the 5 bonking sounds. When we came back on Sunday, I don't know why there were 3. Maybe I honestly don't know. I don't know if they were alerting somebody else to our presence, telling them how many were there, or I don't know. I don't know. That's just when they went down to the yuppies, it was only once at a time, and it was maybe every 20 or 30 minutes until they stopped singing. And then we didn't hear it, or we fell asleep so quickly we didn't hear it anymore. So, I don't know.
It'd be nice to talk to those guys, see if anything happened to them that night, out there.
I did. Yeah, that's true. I thought about that after the fact, but when you're in the moment, you don't think like that. You're only experiencing what's happening now. Because there were some people that were camped just on the other side of that little hill where my vehicle was parked. And they were maybe 100 yards away from us. And they left on Sunday night. I didn't even see them. So I think that they were some bow hunters that were up there trying to scout an area because we never saw them. They came back late at night, and then they were gone the next morning on Sunday. But and then we saw park rangers coming back and forth. And, I didn't even think to look for tracks in the road to see if anything had crossed. Because if anything had crossed, from what I understand, these things can jump a pretty good distance just from listening to your show. And I only discovered your show last month during a really boring time at work. We had to clean a bunch of equipment and turn it over to the customer after it passed inspection. And I was so bored out of my mind, I had to find something. And I went to start looking for Joe Rogan because somebody recommended his podcast. And I'm like, you know what? Joe Rogan does a pretty good podcast. I wonder if he's done anything on Sasquatch. So I searched Joe Rogan Sasquatch and nothing came up. And then the Sasquatch Chronicles popped up. And I started listening to yours, but I wanted to get to the meat. I didn't want to start from the beginning. I'm just like, you know what? Let's see if this thing's legit. So I typed in Sasquatch Chronicles best of, and I came up with episode, it's 498 or something. You're doing a Christmas special. And dude, there's some crazy stuff. And at that point, I'm just like, you know what? Your show actually validated a lot of what I saw and then discovering Bigfoot, that's the first thing I saw when I came back. And those guys described the movement as very fluid and smooth. And that really validated what I saw. And every time people describe how they move on your show, I'm like, dude, they're saying the same thing I am. Only some of these people have had just as good of an experience as I had, or even more of an encounter. They're saying great detail on the thing, but a lot of the detail is the same as what I saw. So I felt more validated, and I don't care what people at work think about me. I'll blab it anyway because what I saw was true. I don't need them to tell me it's true. I'm not an idiot.
Yeah, I hear you. Have you ever thought about going back to that area?
Oh, yeah. I've gone back a couple of times since then, but it was for other purposes. I'll probably go back again. I mean, after listening to some of the stuff on the show, by the time we left, everybody in my family knew that I was talking about Bigfoot. My 11-year-old was like, "Is that sound normal?" And I'm like, "Nope, it's not normal. What do you think's making it?" And I kind of told her. And then my 5-year-old he's like, because he always saw me packing around my pistol. It never left my side. He's like, "Dad, are we going to kill Bigfoot?" Because he heard us talking about Bigfoot too. And I said, "No." He's all, "Why not?" And I'm like, I asked him, I was like, "Has Bigfoot done anything to hurt us? Has he done anything to make us extra scared?" Or I kind of kept everything to myself because I didn't want everyone to become really uneasy. I mean, it got to the point where the fire that I had at night was 6 feet long and 3 feet tall.
Yeah.
I was burning it bright, and then I would wake up in the middle of the night. I'd walk out there. I'd restoke it because I was collecting 10 to 20 foot fallen trees to keep feeding into the fire so that I never ran out. So, I mean, there's that.
Yeah, it's a scary encounter, but I'm glad that nothing really happened to you guys. It seems like when people are camping or when there's kids around or when there's noise around, they'll kind of come around out of curiosity and I think observe what's going on. Sometimes it does turn violent, but I think in most cases, probably a large percentage of the cases, it doesn't. They'll come around and they'll kind of observe to see what you're doing, what's going on. What do you think that they are, John? What's kind of your opinion as far as what Sasquatch is?
I've thought about that a lot. In my younger years, I think I just assumed it was one person. We're a pretty religious family, and I grew up religious, and I just this is just Cain wandering the earth. But then as I started getting older and more mature, and you'd see evidence of Indian petroglyphs having pictures of these things. So that goes back to ancient times. I'm like, okay, still be Cain. But then how does Cain get across the ocean for the people over there that are seeing it? How does Cain do this? There's no way he's going to appear in a couple of places at a time, if that's even possible. You know what I'm saying? So after a while, I started looking in the Bible just to see what the devil it said about Cain. He left his father with his brothers and sisters, and they conceived, and his wife, and they conceived children after that, founded their own city. But I don't know. I thought it might be the Nephilim, like a lot of people say, because they say that the daughters of man lay with the Nephilim, and the offspring thereof became great warriors. And they say that Goliath was part Nephilim, which is why he was so huge. They estimate him to be about 10 feet tall, which is massive for a man. But honestly, I don't know. I even thought maybe it's the offspring of Cain, but it doesn't say what kind of mark was put on Cain so people wouldn't kill him. And people have obviously tried to shoot Sasquatch. I've heard your podcast. Some people claim to be successful at it. So I don't know. To me, if they're not the offspring of Cain or Nephilim, then they're obviously something else that we just don't know. And they're obviously smart enough and intelligent enough. They can live in harmony with their environment, and they're extremely good at hiding from us. If I didn't catch that movement, I'll bet you I could have walked within 20 feet of that thing and never seen it if it didn't move.
Yeah, it's hard to figure out what these things are. There's no wrong answer, of course, to that question, but I'm always curious of people's opinion. And I know some people do think it's Cain, and I've said in the past, I thought about doing a show on the mark of Cain, but I don't think it's Cain. I mean, it's a pretty harsh judgment on Cain to roam the earth for the rest of eternity, as a hairy giant. It just doesn't seem to add up to me. I know some people do believe that, and I respect their beliefs, but, there's been millions of people that have killed their brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers over how many generations have been on the earth, and they didn't receive that sort of punishment, yet Cain received this very harsh punishment. But, it's hard to say what they are. It's Nephilim or an abomination or just some primate we haven't caught up with, which is harder and harder for me to buy into. But it could be, and that's what I really want it to be. I want it to be some primate we just haven't caught up with. But I think there's way too many unanswered questions. There's way too many weird coincidences that go on when these things are around. It's really hard to say. I'm glad that the encounter, especially when you have your family out there, you're kind of exposed and you're in a very compromising position to where an altercation is the last thing on your mind, especially with your family there. And I'm glad that it didn't really do anything. It seems like it was just kind of coming in, checking you out, and didn't really want much more to do with you.
Yeah, I'm glad about that. I mean, I was on high alert with my kids anyway. Anytime anyone disappeared, I kind of freaked out a little bit. Started screaming and they made them come back. So they were a lot closer. But yeah, I don't know. I think these things are intelligent. I've heard that they've got a language. I think they can communicate with each other verbally and with sign language just from listening to what you said. And I even found the ones that happened in California, those conversations of the guys in the 70s which is crazy. But if you think that they communicate with each other verbally, then there's got to be some kind of written language too, or something that they pass on permanently, right? I don't know.
Yeah,
We haven't found anything, but you'd think that would be implied.
Yeah, you would think so. You would think so. Like I said, so many unanswered questions, and hopefully it's a mystery that we'll solve in our lifetime. It's a fascinating account as far as what happened to you, man. I can't think